So recently, a lot of things for this one seem to be about taking charge and taming and organizing and enforcing and holding firm boundaries and things like that. Kind of managing and controlling things. And for this one, it's very uncomfortable, A, and B, it's a weird place that I realize that for this one is about getting out of the way. But historically, my understanding of getting out of the way has been, to let go and, let what happens happen, and Allah's in charge and all this kind of stuff, right? But then there seems to be a point where, as a human being who's got alcohol, who's put in a particular post of responsibility, you kind of need to take charge, and it's irresponsible to let things be as they are or go the way that they go without directing them, because there's other people to consider and their safety or their well-being. There's the well-being of the environment and Allah's creation. That, like, one example is, if I let the farm go, maybe 2,000 years ago that would have worked, but because there's introduced weeds, those weeds would just take over, and that would be bad for nature and farming. So there's a responsibility there to manage that. So in that case, it seems that getting out of the way is actually, in a weird way, not getting out of the way, not just letting it be. And so I wonder, what are we really getting out of the way of, I suppose, and what are we getting in the way of on purpose,
Okay, good question. Massive paradox, isn't it? So I want to do good, and I want to be close to Allah, but these things need to get done, and I'm the one with the hands that are the responsibility for this. I see this as it may not look parallel, but the paradox is there, that on one side is taking charge, and on the other side is flow. It would be nice if you could pick one or the other, because if you're taking charge, you can be, get all project oriented and get everything, lined up and, this done by this, but then the part of you that wants to be close to Allah is having some trouble connecting to that because things have to be done. So, what I think might be another way to think about this is not to think of them as parallel, but as eventually joining. In other words, you've got your flow, you've got your responsibility and duty, and you're going back and forth, but what if you're getting closer and closer for them to be going together and in parallel?
It's funny you say that, because what I've noticed with the kids at school is that, as I've been insisting on a little bit more structure and discipline for them, it's like sort of making them do some work, and then they can have some play, and then they can do some work, and then have some play. I'm sort of like alternating it. But it's also kind of like, as they get used to the work, there's less resistance to the work. And that can also be a kind of flow.
Kind of what?
A kind of flow.
Yes.
Because the conflict wasn't so much about the thing itself, it was about their fear of the unknown of it. The more familiar they get with it, it becomes part of them, and then they can do it without any kind of, bucking and whining and complaining and arguing. it becomes less so, because it just becomes the thing that you do.
And I think what you're doing with that is you're clarifying their intention. And when we're trying to bring these opposites together, you are saying we're moving towards consensus between these two things. We're looking for compatibility of how they work together. Right now, they don't work together. They seem completely opposite. But in reality, down the line, they actually merge together. And in Zen, it's called before enlightenment, chopping wood, carrying water. After enlightenment, chopping wood, carrying water.
In Sufism, lighting the wood, putting the water in the stove, and making a soup.
Yeah, that's right. So if you think, rather than, because as humans we tend to see things in kind of a two-dimensional frame. You know, it is this at this time, when in reality everything is transforming from one thing to another.
Yeah, we learn things through their opposites in a lot of ways, don't we? Because we go, oh, hang on, this is that, but it's not that. But then sometimes we find out, well, sometimes it is that, but then sometimes it's not that, you know? And it's like those distinctions become more complex and and things become more, you see the connections between interrelated things that didn't previously seem related, but you find ways in which they're related, and then they become part of the same structure, I guess, or become part of the understanding of Allah, because it's like, oh, well, I thought this was Allah and this is not Allah, but it turns out some of this is Allah and some of this is Allah, and some of this is not Allah and some of this is not Allah. And so your distinctions get finer and more subtle.
In education, we first learn, especially in teaching kindergarten, that you want to identify opposites: high, low, fast, slow, big, small, because those are difficult to understand, and by getting those we have a clarity about how the world is starting to work and being able to identify things. Later, in about year 4 and 5, there's an emphasis on learning the difference between reality and fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
And that these aspects need to be clarified so that you can move easily back and forth, rather than being confused about, well, I don't know if this is real or not. And I think in part of our maturity, we're learning to as we identify these aspects of how life works and how the world works, again, we're witnessing and articulating some basic truths that allow us to then move on and develop more subtle understanding of how these things interrelate. Because in the beginning, it's kind of like, I don't understand, light and dark. Why is there night? You know, what's going on? It was just daylight a few minutes ago. So learning how these things work and how everything flows from one to another is eventually, I think, where I'd like to end up as we bring the thing about responsibility and flow and bring them slowly together where they actually belong. And that's the truth of it. The reality is that there's no distinction. It's only in our head that we've created these boxes. So eventually, I think being able to, as you take responsibility for the things that you're supposed to be able to do it with your heart as well as the intelligence, the akal, that it becomes a flow as well as and it's not a duty anymore, it's doing things out of love, for the sake of love.
Yeah, because if you can find Allah in what you're doing, there's not really, there's no need for an alternative activity to connect you to Allah.
Right.
But for some reason, it's like we develop into this point where, I mean, for this one, you know, say drawing is feels like it really connects me to Allah. I can kind of get hanging out washing. That's not bad. Because I'm outside and I get to breathe and all that kind of stuff. Folding washing, no. I haven't yet seen the Allah in that.
And that's the thing, is like, if we have these we're carrying around all of these pre-made suppositions that things are supposed to be this way. In reality, there is no distinction. We make that up and we carry it around with us.
Yeah. So where do we get that idea from, that this thing is from Allah and this thing which is equally from Allah, but we feel that it's not. It's either hard or boring or scary or upsetting or negative, and we're like, that can't be Allah because it's yucky, you know. It's
Yes.
not.
Well, I've been talking about this with Alameen, who might be able to give you the answer.
Okay.
Might. I can only sort of, speak from this one's experience, in that what you were saying before, Sheikh, about, you know, the boxes and the conditioning. And yeah, from, you know, my past experiences with, you know, my own family and, you know, social experiences in my environment, I've perceived, you know, Allah or the world through a certain lens, and sometimes that lens has meant, well, that's not Allah, but, you know, this is Allah, and yeah, that over there's Allah, but this is not Allah. And yeah, when you start to get a bit of distance from those boxes and get yourself out of the boxes, you start to get into that space where, like what you were saying, Millie, about being outside and the drawing and connecting to more and more of those experiences. And then once you start to have those experiences, you sort of realise, yeah, like you said, Sheikh, how little you do know and how much one has stopping oneself from being and seeing with Allah. And not to say that it's still, you know, you still fall into the trap of continually being in that conditioned mind and seeing something through the one lens, but the perspective changes. And it's a bit like an image of like when I was starting the path, you sort of like you're on this flat ground, and you're seeing this big mountain, and you're saying, oh, you know, I see this mountain, and that's it. And then you decide to start walking up the mountain, and then you sort of look down and sort of, I can see the mountain, but I can see this and I can see that and I can see this as well. And yeah, things start to connect. That's all.
Okay. Good. I'm just reminded of what Sheikh Tanner used to do, and one of the memories that comes back is that we were in a beautiful place up in the mountains, visiting one of the murids, and we're walking along, and it was just a beautiful spring day, and there's all these flowers in the trees, and you can smell the pine trees, and it's just a beautiful day. And we're saying, oh, Allah is so beautiful. And the Sheikh's going, look down. So we go, okay. We look down, and there's a deer carcass. And he goes, Allah? Is that Allah? And it like, but the brain just kind of twisted inside out and went, and realized that I had kept just beautiful things are supposed to be Allah, and that's not true. That all of this is all ongoing, all part of showing Allah all these different ways. That was just one time, but that was very powerful.
Give another example.
Yeah?
I was convinced that Barbie could not teach my daughters anything, and that it should not be in the house. But there have been 3 times in the last 2 weeks where I've said, "Where did you learn that from?" And it turns out that they learnt it from watching the Barbie cartoon.
Well, what do you know?
You know how Allah has a place for everything except country and Western music?
Yes.
My version of that was, everything belongs except possibly
Barbie.
Very high-pitched American cartoon. But I've had to enlarge my perception of Allah and His ways of knowing.
Indeed. Yes. No, I am still to be convinced about country and Western.
It's tricky. Yeah, it's a tricky one. I think 90s dance music is possibly harder to see a lie in than country and Western music, but that's just my personal.
Yeah, it's sort of, again, that's same topic, but it just reminds me of what you were saying yesterday about emptying oneself. The task of being empty rather than filling the cup.
Mm-hmm.
And by having, I was going to say unloading, but letting go and emptying oneself can allow, that perception to happen, Shay?
Yeah, and I think on the process of trying to understand oneself, the idea of approaching things as questions rather than answers is helpful, because if you question everything, it'll be a continuous education. Whereas if you think you know something, it really means that you've wiped out a whole area that you're not going to look at, and imagine that you have some actual knowledge.
Yeah, it's interesting. Sometimes I'm listening to some podcasts of people who are experts in their field, whether it's scientists or certain academics, and I listen. I just think, wow, that it's just so articulate and smart and knowledgeable, and it's I really admire for these people being leaders in the industry, but sort of I've been sort of reflecting about what you just said, but when I think about these certain individuals, they seem very also stuck on their beliefs, and I think when you're in that space, it doesn't allow for other things to come in.
Yeah, there's quite a long history in talking about opposites, the somewhat opposite sides of Sufism and academics. That they really have difficulty fitting into the same room, as it were. Because the academics will cite their sources and look externally at everything and have, well, these are facts. These are, it's published. We've had it tested and we've had evidence and everything, and yet we know so very little about life in this universe and the world and just ourselves. But to imagine that we're an expert at anything is kind of like, well, that's kind of arrogant.
Yeah, that's why I sort of, I like hearing those stories about some of the, it's about the peers and, the Sufi masters, about how some of them didn't receive any formal education or knowledge, and yet, they were able to, through their closeness to Allah, access information and knowledge which, was not available to most of the population.
Learning how to connect with your heart and learning how to listen to it is probably the most important thing of all. Because that way you can enter into an engagement of any kind with anything. because then you're learning how to listen. And to me, this is one of the highest art forms of all, one of the greatest forms. But next to learning how to think, learning how to listen is vital. Because then you can ask a question and then you can find the answer because you're listening for it. But if you're having a conversation and you're not listening to the other person, then what are you doing? And again, when you're talking to Allah, let's say you pray to Allah and you ask something, do you know how to listen for the answer? Because very often we have fantasies and expectations about what that answer is going to be, rather than allowing the answer to be whatever it's going to be.
No. Sometimes the answer is no.
That's right. Can you accept that? Or are
Exactly.
you going to argue?
If you're not listening, you're not going to get it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it can be just as simple as that. No. Sometimes yes.
Or not yet. Or
Just wait.
wait a bit. Yeah.
We're not quite ready yet. We got things in motion, but you're gonna have to be more patient. Again, I can't stand being patient. Come on, you can surrender, and you need to be a little more humble. I am humble.
I'm the humblest person I know. Okay?
I know I am humble.
Humbler than you.
Yeah, I win. It's a little tricky trying to keep your intention clear, because in the world, everything is kind of in motion trying to attract your attention. It's kind of like it's kind of, space-time and the curve of matter and mass. I think other people's nefs are like that too, that we're attracted to these warps in emotions and are drawn into them without realizing it. Ooh, emotional space-time. I must write about this. I will become an expert in it. You know what I mean? It's kind of like you're drawn towards these things that you don't know why. Sometimes I'm drawn to somebody because I have no clue how this person works, and all I want to do is understand them. And it may be a rather, what's the word I'm looking for? Toxic relationship, but at least I will understand it eventually. That's just me personally. I don't advise it, but been there many times.
Eventually you sort of start seeing it before it happens. Like, a couple of times recently, I'm like drawn to somebody and like, hang on. Okay, they're a mirror.
Yes, and usually for me it's somebody who's somewhat damaged in some in some psychic way.
Get really sidetracked by thinking there's something deeper going on, but sometimes it's just, this is just to show you an aspect of your own nafs,
Yeah, little mirrors. Yeah, Little Mirrors. That's a good title for a book too, or a song. Little Mirrors. Or there's a weird thing for both genders where you think you can, I can fix this person. I know just what they need, and I'm the one to fix them.
That's a very common danger for teachers.
Oh, true.
It's your job to help, but it's like, when does helping become, I know better than you and I'm going to fix?
Yeah. What we're taught in Sufism is wait for them to ask the question. Then that's the time. But you can't jump it.
Mm-hmm.
You can't short circuit it. You have to wait. Same with therapy. You just wait for them to ask the right question. You go, oh, finally. Now we can talk about that. But they're not ready to talk about it if they don't ask about it. They can't see it and they're not aware of it, so why waste your time? All right. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, Rahman Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin, Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'in, Ihdina sirata mustaqim, Sirata ladzina an'amta alayhim, Ghayril maghdubi alayhim waladdallin. Amen.
Thank you, Shaykh. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Shukran, Shaykh. Thanks,
Shukran.
guys.
Salaam Alaykum.
Thanks for Akar. Walaikum salam.
Yeah.
Salaam Alaykum, murids, seekers, curious, and interested listeners. We appreciate you and are happy to share our Sufi message. Your donation will help support our Sufi Center in Sydney, where we do zikr, Sohbet, spiritual counseling, and healing services. We believe the message should be free, but it costs equipment, rental, services, software, and hardware to get this to you. So thank you for choosing our podcast among all the millions available. If you go to our website, AnsariSufiOrder.org, you will be able to donate through PayPal whatever you think this information is worth to you. Blessings and love, the Australian Ansari Sufi Order.